Hey guys, one quick thing before we get to the episode. Scott and I just wanted to let you know that we are going to be going live each Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time to connect with you and to answer any questions that you may have right on YouTube. So if you've not subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, or if you're watching on it, cool, great, glad you're here. We're going to be live on YouTube at 11 a.m. Central, 12 noon, or 9 a.m. Pacific each Friday, answering your questions and connecting with you personally. We hope you guys will join us, and we'll see you there. And now on to the episode. Hey guys, welcome back to We Got Balls. And today, as you've seen by the title, we've got an interesting episode. But before we get to the episode, this be a little cliffhanger right now, Scott. Scott, today is favorite shirt day on We Got Balls. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see our shirts. I've got a shirt here that says Hike and Go Seek. And Scott wearing his favorite Spider-Man shirt, always a fan of the heroes.
Yeah.
And so we just want to lighten the mood a little bit, because today we're going to talk about rape fantasy. What in the heck? Why in the heck will we talk about that? I mean, there's so much here to be curious about. And just to invite you, if you're listening, there is a real deep meaning to some of these truths. And we're going to get uncomfortable. We're going to get, as my friend Eli likes to say, we're going to get butt naked emotionally about this. So if you've got desires and have ever had a fantasy about rape, either being raped or raping someone else, we're going to talk about that. And, we're probably going to get censored like hell, but who knows? So stick around for that conversation. We'll be right back.
Welcome to We Got Balls, real, raw, masculine sex talk with Chris Inman and Scott Cohn. Here we go.
So, Scott, when you think about this idea of a rape fantasy, and I don't know, personally or in your fantasy life, if that connects with you or you've heard stories about that, what do you tend to go to when you think about why would someone want to fantasize about rape?
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you've listened to our sexual abuse episodes, you hear me actually tell a story about my experience being raped when I was 17. And so not only has it been a fantasy, it's actually been an experience, a really painful experience in my life. But it took me a long time to kind of engage that story, but it did show up in my fantasy life. So I remember this was before I was really kind of pursuing recovery from unwanted sexual behavior, that I ran across a story of a guy who was thrown into jail for petty crime as a teenager. He was kind of a troubled youth, and he got thrown into jail. And his first night in jail, he had two guys basically hold him down and rape him in jail. And they took turns with him. And while he was being raped, he got an erection, and they called him a little bitch. And that made the rape even all that more exciting to the rapist, because this guy was getting aroused and they could humiliate him. And this guy, in his account, talked about how he had never been sexual with other guys before, and he was humiliated by the fact that his body responded the way it did to a violent sexual act like this. And it was completely degrading to him. And I found the story to be arousing, Chris.
Wow, Scott. Wow.
And so I could so relate to it, because that exact same experience happened to me when I was raped. It was not welcomed. It was not wanted. It was not on my radar. I was asleep, and this guy took advantage of me in my sleep, and I woke up to, being raped. And yet my body had responded with arousal. And I felt incredible shame and humiliation around that experience, because what I told myself is, you're a little faggot. You liked getting it up the ass. That's why you got an erection. And my abuser, when I told him to get off me, even pointed out the fact that I had gotten an erection. So why should he stop? I was clearly enjoying it. He purposely tried to rope me in to feeling complicit in his attack of me, so that he could feel less shame about what he was doing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's and there's so many places we can go with this conversation, Scott. First of all, I appreciate your vulnerability and I honor that. And want to know that, I am drawn towards you and feel more affection towards you as you share, rather than being like, oh my gosh, why would Scott have an erection while he's being, what's wrong with Scott? Quite the opposite. Because there is a desire and an arousal that happens in our bodies in ways that we can't explain. But I think there's two pieces to this conversation, and I want to start with where you started, which is being raped, and then we'll come back later in the episode and talk about why would someone be attracted to raping or wanting to forcibly have sex with someone else. And again, let me just say off the top of this, we believe that being raped and raping, being raped is not something that you asked to have experienced to you. It is a crime and it is an assault when you are raped. There's no reason to victim shame or say that someone invited being raped just because they had some physical attribute. And also, choosing to force sex on someone else without consent is also a crime. It's also wrong. And just because we're having compassion on both the victim and the abuser doesn't mean that we're condoning this behavior whatsoever. In a relationship, if you want to role play this out, a different story, we may get to that as well. But I just want to be very clear so that if somebody actually listens to this episode, they're not thinking we're condoning or dismissing anything that's not consensual.
Yeah, and just in general, any kind of sexual advance, touch, language, proposition, anything. It doesn't have to be intercourse. It doesn't have to be anal intercourse. Anytime somebody approaches you and solicits you and it's unwelcome, it's an assault of some kind. It's abusive. And
Yes.
so that can be just verbally, it can be physical touch, it can be actual penetration, and that is abusive sexual behavior. And in some cases, if you're a minor or if it's unwelcome, it can be absolute crime. So, yeah.
So I want to come back to what you said is the being aroused while being raped. I was watching a television series. I want to allude to it, but if you've seen it, you may know what this is. Where someone made the comment that, I can tell when a woman is excited by how wet her vagina is when I'm having sex with her. And as he kept repeating this through the series, and it got to the end of the series, and someone that he really respected told him a story. Someone who had been prostituted told him a story. He said that the time when my vagina was the most wet was when I was absolutely being brutalized, raped. And so he said, just because there is arousal in a body doesn't mean the arousal was from desire and pleasure and excitement in a positive sense. It may be the body reacting to other stimuli that are there. So I think we need to spend some time de-shaming our bodies in the midst of sexual arousal.
Yeah. So just from a purely biological anatomy standpoint, there are nerves that innervate the prostate and the anus of a man that are different than the nerves that innervate his penis, his scrotum. And so having, anal stimulation, if you're the recipient of any kind of anal stimulation of any kind, it can trigger an erection automatically and involuntarily. There are lots of cases, and doctors are trained in this way. When a urologist is giving a prostate exam, they do a digital rectal exam. They put a finger inside and a guy's anus and try to feel his prostate. A lot of times that triggers an erection in the doctor's office. And of course, that can be embarrassing to guys if they don't understand what's going on. Even if they do understand what's going on, it's embarrassing because your body's responding to the touch and there's nothing sexual really going on.
Yeah. Although there is a funny scene in one of the American Pie movies where Stifler goes to give a semen sample and he can't ejaculate, and the nurse comes in and gives him some prostate stimulation.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, he's like completely overcome with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that
it's been made fun of in movies, but I think there's a all comedy comes from pain, right? So there is a painful part of this as well.
So that's just the biology of it, and you can't really help the biology of it. And Emily Nagoski, she wrote about this in the book Come As You Are, where she talks about sexual incongruence. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but just to recap this, sexual incongruence is when I have a sexual arousal experience in my body, but I don't have sexual desire kind of in my mind. So for females, 10% of the time when they experience sexual desire or sexual arousal, there's no desire that's coming with that. So it's a small percentage of time for females, but for males, it's actually much larger. It's 50%. So men can experience sexual arousal 50% of the time and not have any sexual desire. And so this sexual incongruence, she talks about, if I read in the New York Times, she helps sex abuse victims and survivors. But if she reads an article in the New York Times about violent rape and her vagina tingles, does that mean she wants to be violently raped? No, the answer is no. There's an incongruence between what my body is experiencing arousal-wise because of the stimulation of reading the article, and my mind begins to imagine a sexual scenario, but it doesn't mean I have desire. And so for women, it happens 10% of the time, but for men, it's much greater, 50% of the time. So that's why you can have something happen to you in an unwanted sexual experience and become aroused. And yet, if you don't understand that your body can respond to arousal without any desire whatsoever, your tendency is going to be to feel a lot of shame about that, right? Because particularly for males, we know that from the research that's been done on this, the majority of abusers of males are other males. So if another male is abusing me and I get sexually aroused, what does that mean about my sexual orientation?
So Scott, I'm really curious about that 50%, of males who feel arousal and desire after the fact, because I think that's really what gets a lot of guys confused when something happens to me and it was traumatic. And yet in the midst of that, I felt excited. I felt turned on, maybe even had an orgasm. And so there's this experience of, I hate this. I was abused. I don't want to think about it anymore. And yet subconsciously and even deep in my arousal dynamics, that is the thing that excites my body. So I have some friends who talk about when they feel really depressed, they have fantasies that their mind goes to being raped. Like that's like where their mind, their body wants to go to feel like, hey, I deserve to feel like this. I've had an experience of being abused and taken advantage of. And so I can have an escape in this fantasy of feeling like someone is overpowering me, someone is consuming me, someone is filling me up, whether that's, with semen or just with their penis. And so I just feel like it's not my fault that I feel like this. And then that becomes a thing that becomes arousing. It becomes a fantasy piece that they want to masturbate to.
Yeah. So it's not my fault, but I feel shame about what's happening in my body at that point. Yes. So I'm being aroused while I'm being raped, but yet that gets bound together, the arousal with the shame at the same time. And so what does it do to me then in my relationships with others? It makes me have this aversion to getting close or intimacy, or in my case, because my rape occurred in the context of this guy offering me spiritual connection. He was going to teach me more about God and experiencing God in a deeper level. So my entire experience with that gets bound up in a sense of shame about my desire to know God more, my body's response at being physically abused, and just the shame of how I'm getting aroused in that process and the helplessness of all that. So
this just sounds very messy, just very like, I'm excited, I have desires, things that I want, and then this thing happens to me that feels wrong, but it also feels good. If it's how can we sort through the complexity and the swampiness of all of this dynamic?
Yeah, well, it starts with vulnerability, and going back to where we started on this, thanks for creating a safe place for me in our relationship to be able to have this conversation and model this for other guys who, when they watch it, are going to feel safe about kind of going into this maybe in the future at some point with other people in their lives. Because let's say when this experience happened to me when I was 17, who did I talk to about it afterwards? Did I go to my mom and dad and say, hey, I was raped last night?
Yeah, I think that's probably where you went. You sat down at the kitchen table and you held a family meeting.
We did
and
that.
Said, remember that guy that you let into the house? How much older was he than you? I forget.
Like 6 years older than me.
So this older guy that you let sleep in my bedroom, he decided to play hide the penis in me, and so that's. No, you didn't say that at all. You kept it quiet.
I kept it quiet for 40 years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started telling the story in recovery to a close friend, he goes, bro, what in the world were your parents thinking letting this guy spend the night in your room? And it started to make me realize, wow, the level of disengagement that I experienced from my parents as a 17-year-old. They had just kind of thrown their hands up and like, well, whatever he wants to do, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking to allow that. And then for it to happen, and I don't have anybody to so you're right. Like all this intense emotion, that was an intense emotional experience.
For sure. But as you tell it, I look back and just think about how much desire and how much longing and how much desperation was in that to be connected, to be loved by God and seen as a spiritual person. And then at the same time, you have this experience where, yes, it's super intense, but you can't talk about it. It's shut down. As you've mentioned, was it secrecy, silence, and judgment? You were judging yourself for that experience. And so that's the crucible for shame.
And I have nobody to process all this intense emotion with, because you're right, this is a conflicting morass of all these different bodily sensations, emotions, impulses, and it was overwhelming. So what do I do with all that overwhelm? Who do I process that with? I have nobody to process it with. So where does it go? Does it just evaporate over time? Time doesn't heal all wounds.
Well, and I would argue that instead of evaporating, it began to cement. It began to sink down into your body and your soul and become this weight that defines you as, I'm unlovable. I'm unlovable by God. I'm unlovable unless, and let's be very clear, and I'm going to say this in the way it needs to be said, unless I get fucked metaphorically and or physically, that I'm not being true to myself. So the expectation of being raped or being taken advantage of or being abused kind of comes into your life. So that's not just in your body sexually. It can be, was it in your relationships? Was it with work? Where else did this rape show up?
Yeah. I let people take advantage of me a lot. I had a business partner screw me out of a business deal where I was one of the founding members of a company and I had 500,000 shares, and she completely gave me the shaft, literally. And just in every situation, like it made me very reckless about my own personal boundaries and what I would tolerate and what I would not tolerate from other people treating me. I just learned that my body was not my own, and you could treat me however you wanted to, because I am only worthy of being screwed, right? And then it shows up in my arousal template as something that's like really arousing. Why would I want to go back to this and repeat this when it was such a harmful experience? Because I want to go back to it and repeat it in a way that makes me powerful in the experience. Not just.
So how did you fantasize about becoming powerful after this experience when you were 17?
By engaging in anal sex in a mutual way, not having it forced on me, right? Okay. So it's my choice to participate, because in this experience, I had no choice.
You had no consent. It was stolen from you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you can see how that would show up then. It's this attempt to kind of repeat with a reversal. It could be just, I want to go back and repeat that experience because I have a lot of self-contempt and I believe I'm worthy of that. I didn't go in that particular direction. I had enough kind of ego strength to realize I didn't deserve to be treated like that, but I want to go back and repeat that experience in a way that gives me a say in whether or not I want to do this versus having it forced on me. But it could go either way. It just depends on a lot of the other dynamics in your life. I also could have fantasized about actually wanting to rape another person because this was forced on me and I want to repeat it in a way that really reverses it by putting me in the power dynamic side of the equation versus being submitted.
So let's go there, because I think that's an experience that I've had. It was originated in this promise that was given to me by the church, which is if you be a good boy and you don't stick your penis in a vagina before you say I do, then all of your sexual fantasies will come true. Call that the purity culture if you like.
And you're entitled to stick your penis in your wife's vagina anytime you want to.
Oh, that's a piece that was implied but not spelled out. So here it is. I had gone through the process of staying as a virgin until I got married. And again, virginity is a term we shall just put out there as a blanket term. I'd never had sex with another woman before I got married, and so here I am on my wedding night and wanting to be playful and fun. And things were playful and fun for a little bit. And then all the baggage, the shame baggage of our upbringing came to bear. And she had a hard time just, letting go of saying no, because she had said no successfully for many years. And I had, hidden my compulsive survival strategies, as we call them, for many years, because I had plenty of orgasms, just never with a woman. So now I want to be sexual. And I think we talked about this on a previous episode. We talked about needing sex. I would have told you in my early 20s, I needed sex. Now,
all the books you were reading at that time in the church, Every Man's Battle makes it seem like, look, men need to have an orgasm, and wives, if you're withholding it from guys, you're driving them to porn. So it's your duty as a loving, submissive wife to spread the legs anytime he wants it and give it to him, because he cannot control his penis.
And so when that duty sex happens, it robs the spirit of sexual intimacy and connection, because what's funny, what I learned in my own marriage was we would have sex, but we wouldn't kiss. Like, she was totally against kissing. But we could have sex, which tells me kissing is a far more intimate expression than intercourse. And yet, when she's there and we're having intercourse, and she's emotionally shut down for many reasons, a lot of it because I betrayed her and looked at porn, and she's discovered that. And a lot of times because I was not emotionally available and sensitive to her. So I bear part of the responsibility for that, for her protecting herself by shutting down. But when she shuts down, her body also shuts down. And I call it ragdoll sex, where there's a woman who lays there or a man who lays there, and it just becomes dead. And you're doing a physical act. And for me, several times I felt like that I was raping my wife while we were having consensual marital sex. And several times I got up and left because it just felt disgusting. And yet, in the disgust, what did I turn to in my porn use?
That would be rape fantasy.
I turned to looking at rough sex and powering through that shame to have an orgasm or watch someone have an orgasm. And so there's a lot in this dynamic of wanting to push my agenda on someone else because I'm desperate in my body, in my heart, in my mind. Again, wrong to have sex with someone without consent and to force them to do something that they're not willing to participate in. But in my body, it was very confusing. I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah. So how do you get out of this? How do you, when you're struggling with a rape fantasy, whether you want to be on the receiving end or the giving end of it, what do you do to try to decode this and make some sense out of why am I so bound up in this, crazy fantasy where I want to force myself onto another person or I want somebody to force themselves onto me? What do you do?
Of course, Scott. We what we do is we never talk about it.
Yeah.
We take it to our grave and we pretend like it's not a problem and we put a smile on our face. And if we go to church, we say the joy of the Lord is our strength. And we put that mask on and as we rot on the inside. That's what we do.
That is a great recipe for struggling with that fantasy for the rest of your life.
Forever. We do the hard thing, Scott, which is what you and I have gotten comfortable doing. We talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are talking about it on a public medium. And, thanks to our wives who are patient with us and allow us to do this work to help others because they're definitely better women than we are. For sure.
My wife is a better woman than I am. I'm a terrible woman.
We're terrible women. But that's the idea is that I have to talk about it. And time again. In fact, last night we had a conversation where a guy got brave and talked about the things that he struggled with in his story around being taken advantage of.
Yeah. So where does that come from was the question. Like, when did you first begin to believe that the only way you can please another person is to let them use you? Right? That was the question that I asked.
Yeah.
And because all the sexual fantasy was doing is revealing what's below the surface of the sexuality that's causing a lot of emotional pain in my life. And so, sure enough, he admitted that he felt in his family system, because of the circumstances and the degree of care that was required for a sibling who was ill, that all he felt like was a utility whose job was to make sure mom and dad were happy all the time. It was his job to please his parents. And it's a very common feature in guys and females' lives in particular as well. They grow up in a home where there's a lot of enmeshment. Another way of looking at that is triangulation, where the child is put in a role of being a caretaker for a parent or their parents in particular. And in this case, this guy felt like he had to take care of everybody in the family. He was used to just, his job in the family was to make sure everybody was happy. Everybody was pleased. And so how does he escape that? That creates a lot of pain in a person's life. How do we escape that then? I fantasize about the opposite of that.
Yes.
What's the opposite? My entire body is being used to give somebody else pleasure, and I'm getting pleasure out of the process.
Somebody's filling me up, literally.
Because I'm not getting a lot of pleasure out of the way it's being done in my family system. And so that's a very common repetition of that scenario.
Yeah, and I think the reason that rape fantasy is so powerful is because it is saying, I'm going to take this, whether it's I'm going to take it, someone receiving penetration kind of against their will. I'm doing air quotes if you're listening to podcasts, against their will. Yes, I mean, this is very common with women, is there as a desire to be overpowered. And they feel like they're overly responsible and they have to take care of everything. But in the bedroom, they want someone to come in and take charge and please them. So the same is true for guys. I've had to go out and do the work of taking care of others. And I want someone to fill me up, to be satisfied with me, to give me pleasure, to take control. And then vice versa. If you feel like that no one's ever been there for you and you want to go out and make it right, you can overpower someone else and find pleasure in dominating another person. And so this goes both ways, but I think the intensity of it is really important to pay attention to, because the deeper the shame, the greater the intensity, which is why it's so hard to talk about this. Like, if you've listened this far to the episode, you may have resisted clicking on the episode just because of the title, because this hurts.
And I think the underlying emotion in all of this, well, the surface emotion is anger. I'm either directing my anger at another person in contempt, or I'm directing it towards myself. Typically, if I'm directing it towards myself, I'm going to want to be on the receiving end of a more intense sexual experience. If I'm directing it towards others, I'm going to want to be the dominant party in the intense experience and initiating and enacting it. And so you have to ask the question, is there anger in my life about the things that have happened to me? And how is that then showing up in what arouses me? So this becomes a form of eroticized rage, either directed toward yourself or at others. But you can see how if you were responsible for everybody's pleasure growing up, if you had to make everybody happy, why you would go to a fantasy where you don't have to do anything. You just lay back and let it happen to you, and express that anger towards yourself in this way that gives you at least I get pleasure out of doing it this way.
Yeah. So Scott, I think it's, as we think about how this plays out, this is one of those arousal templates where, like you said, they stay buried for decades. And so how do I address it? First of all, be courageous for yourself. And maybe nobody has ever been that courageous for you. Maybe you've not seen that model. But when you have an opportunity, and I'm going to put a big exclamation mark around this phrase, with safe people. If you feel like you're going to get any judgment or any condemnation or any correction or advice on what to do after you talk about this, shut up. But if you feel like there's a good chance that what you have to say about your experience and your desire can be received with kindness and curiosity, take a chance. Maybe you just share a piece of the story. Maybe you kind of let it out a little bit. Maybe you write about it. Maybe you draw about it. Something that's going to get it outside of your body and begin to open up a little bit of the shame, because the shame is really what's keeping you stuck. In the rape fantasy, you feel like you are a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And no one can love that piece of shit.
And we've even had guys do this where we tell them, write out your fantasy in exquisite detail. Like if you're writing a porn script, write out what you want to happen from start to finish and what's the most arousing parts of it and share it with us. And guys are very reluctant to do that because, man, that is a whole nother level of vulnerability. Like, man, I'm revealing all the secrets of my heart. I swore I would take this to the grave.
Well, and I think part of the shame in that, Scott, is this is what's actively turning me on. It's not like it used to turn me on. This is like, if I want to go look at porn today, I'm going to type these words into a search bar and I'm going to look for it right now. And there's a lot of, I can only talk about these things that are past tense. We got to confess in the present tense. Credit to Nate Larkin for that phrase. Because that confession in the present tense is really what punches shame in the face and begins to set us free.
Yeah. And you do that in an environment, you're vulnerable with others who are safe, absolutely critical, but it begins to remove the power of shame to compel your behavior because it's coming out of a place of shame and you're continuing to stay with it because it reinforces the shame that you already feel in the original experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
So the only way to dismiss that is in community because shame is a communal experience. I feel shame in the gaze of others. But when I can take this thing, my rape, and bring it into your gaze, and I find nothing but care and kindness, not condemnation, but like, bro, that was so painful to hear. Like when you talked about your arousal, I could feel the conflict in my own body, like I was being torn apart.
Yeah.
And when you engage with me with that kind of caring attunement, I know that you know what it's like to be me. And now I feel seen. Now I feel known. Now I feel heard. And all of the intensity of the shame, the secrecy, the judgment, the condemnation around that shameful event just goes down. And I'm able to look at it with a different perspective than I've ever looked at it before. Instead of talking to myself like I'm a bad, worthless person when I recount this story, I realize, you know what? My body did exactly what God designed it to do when it experiences pleasure. And I didn't ask for that. And the fact that my body responds with pleasure doesn't mean I wanted it or enjoyed it or that I had some kind of secret motive to engage in a sexual experience. It means I was being abused.
And the fact that you can be in a group of people and tell that story and then watch the faces that are drawn to you. And even, and I love when this happens, when we're in a circle or on a screen and we ask, how many other people have ever had this happen or ever felt this way? And then the hands just begin to go up. And that warming feeling of I am not alone. I thought this was uniquely my burden to carry. And yet we hear and see the faces of other people who say, me too, in a positive way, not in a political way, but in a human relational way. I've been there. I see that. I feel that. I'm with you. That right there, Scott, is, I think, what makes this whole thing worth it. Pushing through the difficulty to get to the connection.
That's when I started to get free from my pornography usage that was looking at
what
rape.
You can stop looking at porn, Scott? Oh my gosh. I thought you had to just try really hard and to just beat yourself up and just that if I can just do this better. So you're saying that weakness and vulnerability is actually what led you to freedom from porn?
It led me to having a heart of tenderness and compassion for that 17-year-old boy, to see the truth of why that man was in his bedroom taking advantage of him in the first place was his love of God.
Yes.
And to bless him, to honor the goodness of his longings and his desires, and to care, to be with him, not to hate him.
No. Because he deserves love of God and men in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so we just want to do more of that. So guys, as you listen, I hope you've picked up in this very difficult conversation that it's impossible to do the work of healing from these types of fantasies, whatever type of fantasy, but especially these really dark fantasies that are really shameful, in isolation or intellectually. There will never be a book entitled How to Heal from Your Rape Fantasy, because it just doesn't work.
In 5 easy cognitive steps.
That's right. Because it doesn't work. It requires relationship. And I hope you'll feel in what we do is the relationship that Scott and I have and that we share with other men bleeds out in these conversations because we care for each other and we can care for ourselves in that environment. So if you're interested in getting in an environment where you can begin to care for yourself and heal and be vulnerable and be safe, we'd encourage you to reach out to us at successfulmen.com. We'd love to get you plugged into a group that meets every week and can begin to help you decode the arousal dynamics that keep you stuck. And there's many other opportunities to connect with us in person, via retreats or virtually in groups. And we just want to put that plug in your ear because it is a way to heal. You can sit back and listen, and that's great. And we want to continue to encourage you to do that. Subscribe to the channel, share it with others. Scott, we've had some really great listeners who are just plugging We Got Balls on all kinds of social media, and we're so grateful.
They're plugging our balls.
Whoa, hold on. Don't touch my balls.
Yeah.
We got to keep them balls. So, but that's what we want to do is spread the message, but also spread the connection. So if you're seeking connection, reach out to us. We love to connect with you as we do every week right here on We Got Balls.
And you do too.
Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris and with Scott at successfulmen.com.